Hi, I'm Dr. Allana Coffee. I recently interviewed someone who brought up the concept of belongingness. What we know from Maslow's hierarchy of needs is how important belongingness is for things like self-efficacy, self-esteem, and self-actualization and peak performance. This man, who's seventh generation Hawaii, is of European descent, and he looks like it. And there have been times when people said he did not belong to Hawaii and that he wasn't from here despite being born and raised. When he went to the continent and was surrounded by people who looked more like him, initially he felt a sense of belonging. But what he realized, and I think it's important for us all to realize, is that belonging has a lot more to do with just the way we look and our skin color. It has to do with the way that we feel about the land and the people who we're with. Belongingness has to do with a shared history and a shared set of goals and common interest in knowledge. And so with that in mind, he came home, and here he works so hard and diligently with the kupuna. He specializes in gerontology and psychology, and he currently is raising the 8th generation. I'm very honored and happy to interview and introduce actually Dr. Lucas Paul Kavika Morgan. Aloha, folks.
I'm Allana Coffee, a clinical psychologist here in Honolulu, Hawaii. And today I'm interviewing Dr. Morgan, Dr. Lucas Morgan. He and I are both on the Committee of Diversity and Equity with the Honolulu Psychological Association. And it is my honor to bring him here today because he's just got a wealth of information and knowledge. And our purpose for these interviews always is to make sure that people know about psychology and that psychology is normalized. We study it, we love it, and we just want to be able to share it with you. So thank you for coming this morning, Dr. Morgan. I understand you ran 13 miles this morning.
I know. I was putting it off as the virtual Hapalua half marathon, and this was the last weekend. So I struggled through 13 miles and made it. But yeah, thank you so much for having me here this morning.
My pleasure, my pleasure. So one of the things I want the people to know who are watching and listening to this video is that we are nearing the end, we hope, of COVID. And so part of this interview, well, the reason why this interview is outside is so that we can be safely socially distanced, even though we're both taken care of and safe. But with that said, that means that there's going to be ambient noise. There could be a cat, a rooster, or motorcycle, a lawnmower. Anything could happen, and we're just going to keep talking through that. Are you okay with that?
That sounds great.
Okay, because that's actually real life anyway, isn't it?
I love this. Yeah, this is amazing.
It's the norm.
Yeah.
So about psychology in you, I was so glad to meet you again in the work that we're doing on the committee. And I wanted to just kind of start with how you got into psychology and, you know, what inspired you?
Yeah, good question. Long story, as they often are. I was actually kind of anti-psychology, and I got my undergraduate degree in conservation ecology, and because my goal was to come back to Hawaii and help save the endangered species here, because as many know, we're the endangered species capital of the country, and I was always kind of like, man, people really go to a place and they kind of mess it up, you know, and people are complicated, and I love being in nature. Grew up in the back of Nu'uanu Valley with nobody around, so I also had a roommate in college who would come back from his Psych 101 classes. He was a psych major, and he would just diagnose me all day long. And so I was like, no thanks, you're not gonna put me in a box, none of this psychology stuff. But after coming back to Hawaii after college and working in the field for a couple years, I started to feel like I was called to do something different with my contribution, in my lifetime. And I had been into sort of Buddhist stuff in high school and college for my own personal, I got to figure something out to help change certain habits I have. Meditation being already something that was there, Buddhist, very structured approaches to changing unhelpful habits. And I thought, why not do this in mental health? Maybe there's people out there doing it. So I found some journal articles. I'm like, okay, I could do this. CBT sort of plus mindfulness.
Nice.
So that's what really got me on track. I started at Psych 101 at KCC on the weekends, doing my conservation job, and ended up going to Boston to work with amazing person, Dr. Elizabeth Romer, who studies mindfulness-based behavioral treatments, acceptance-based behavioral treatments for anxiety, and just couldn't be more lucky to have had that training.
You know, before we talk about Dr. Romer, I want to like back up and so you went to KCC. You did your first, that's
Psych 101 at KCC.
That's great.
Yeah,
and I think that's one of the things that people maybe don't realize is that we start humbly and maybe not actually start off in psychology, but start off in ecology and find our way to psychology. All of these fields to me are cousins, right? Because the one thing relates to the other, and we cannot have healthy environments without healthy humans and vice versa. So it all relates. But it's so cool to hear where you started at KCC.
Yeah.
Now tell us a little bit more about what you were doing with Dr. Romer.
Amazing experience at UMass Boston with Dr. Romer. She is like a second mother, just this heart that cares, but also expects, and so she was very rigorous in our research training, in our critical thinking, in not categorizing. A lot of CBT folks kind of, sometimes look down on other theoretical orientations, but she taught me how to translate and like, wow, a lot of these different orientations are saying similar things with different words.
Right.
So how can we talk across disciplines?
So I'm going to pause you for another moment. So CBT is cognitive behavioral therapy, and this is what we consider to be the gold standard in the field. But there are other therapies, and they sometimes are quite complementary, but depending on where we go to school, our advisors will say you must be disciplined in the one approach. Other supervisors are more flexible and will say you can be eclectic and use multiple approaches. You're someone that found a way to use multiple approaches.
Multiple approaches and see the common threads through them, and see that in most cases, there's Martha.
That's Martha.
Hey, Martha.
It's country.
And very deep knowledge of CBT with the humility that nobody has all the answers, and language is a tool, but we're often only looking at a very small piece of the puzzle.
Right. Can I ask you, I'm going to bring you back home from Boston for a moment, because you're finding a way to weave disciplines, both Western and Eastern philosophies, right? Because you talked about Buddhism and things like that. So, but you are of Hawaii, are you not? You local boy, aren't you?
Yep, I wouldn't look like it.
Yeah.
But
talk about that, Lucas.
Yeah, so long, deep roots here. Both sides of my mom and dad's families. I am the 7th generation to live in Hawaii, and so we just 2020 was 200-year anniversary of the arrival of my mom's side, which was Hiram Bingham and Sybil Bingham, the first American missionary boat to get here in 1820, which is a complicated history.
It really is.
And, so my dad's side was Amos Starr Cook, another side, and so almost all of my great grandparents, etc., were all born here, citizens of the Hawaiian Kingdom. Some of them spoke Hawaiian. During the overthrow time, there were ancestors on the overthrow side and some on the monarchy side. And growing up as a haole, that's been a very complicated journey of identity, living here.
Right. I would imagine. I grew up here too, as chocolate. And so definitely, a different identity, right? Because we're local, we understand the context and we understand some of the history, but not necessarily acknowledged as such, right? Readily. So, right. But
the concept of local, right? When you say, oh, a local guy or a local girl, there's phenotypic, or there's what a local person looks like here. And it's understandable. It makes sense why it evolved that way. And yet it doesn't include some folks who look otherwise, which I definitely struggle with growing up. I mean, I'll just tell you a little bit about that identity process, in fifth grade. So I went to Nu'uanu Elementary up until fourth grade, or third grade. Fourth grade, I went to Punahou. And so throughout much of my adolescence and teenage years, I tried very hard to be as least white as possible. So I talked smack about tourists, about military, because that was one way that I could other someone else to say, I'm in with you guys, know. And complicated too, I have a half brother who's part Hawaiian.
Oh, wow.
And one really poignant experience I remember, and he's 10 years older, so he was kind of like, my idol. So I always wanted to do everything he would. But I remember one time being on a big island with him at Pu'ukohola Heiau, and at the edge of that heiau, there's a sign that says only Hawaiians can enter. So he went, and I had to stay out, and that sense of like, wow, there's this real difference, even though he's my brother, and that really was hard. But so interestingly, I went to college. I didn't want to go to college on the mainland because I'm like, mainland people, they don't know. They come here, they're so the kind, And but my parents are like, please just apply to one school. It's really good to expand your experiences. Go somewhere else for a little while. You can always come back. So I applied to one school, got in, luckily went there, upstate New York, very different. And I had this most interesting experience when I got there. I realized, I noticed this sense of kind of this relaxedness that I felt. And I'm like, what is this? And I realized it was around being white people, around all white people, that for once I didn't have to think about race. Race wasn't on my radar, as it is constantly here. Just where am I in position to other people around me? And that was a interesting experience, but I still didn't feel like I belonged there.
I was going to say, you didn't stay there. You still came home.
Culturally, I love Hawaiian culture. I love nature. I love native Hawaiian plants. I still do. And this is where my family is, and took Hawaiian in high school, Hawaiian language. I really love Hawaiian culture, and yet I always felt like I didn't want to, I wasn't allowed to belong. So I had that,
What was your reasoning in joining the desk committee? That is the Diversity and Equity Steering Committee that we're both on. Because we're right at that place. What were you hoping to have to affect there? What was your thinking?
Well, I think it's an opportunity for me to contribute to our psychology community, because as that identity process developed, especially in grad school, because I had another amazing mentor, Karen Suyamoto, who's a professor there, who, our first year, we all take culture and mental health. And it's not your didactic run-of-the-mill checklist, it's a small world after all kind of class. It is very much about looking at dynamics of privilege and marginalization, power and privilege in intersectional ways between yourself and another person, whether it's a client, a partner, a friend, a coworker. And it helped me to start to realize that all of the invisible privilege I have in my life across race, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, able-bodiedness, age, temporarily, right? And so coming back after grad school, I got to see how there's this interplay between my personal experience of not belonging, which is painful,
Yeah.
And I still am struggling with belongingness. I still want that. In the context of this much larger sort of multi-layered levels of privilege. Like thinking back to Puno, walking around there, my ancestors' names are chiseled into the rock on the top of the buildings, Bingham, Cook Hall, like those are literally Atherton, that's literally my ancestors' last names.
Crazy.
My ancestor, Hiram Bingham, actually started that school in 1841.
Wow.
So like,
And it's still not enough for you to necessarily inherently feel like you belong.
And I realized I don't belong because I'm part of the colonizer. And I knew that my people, my ancestors came and were part of a global, colonizing process.
Lucas, you want me to make a referral for you, honey?
Don't worry, I already have a psychologist of my own.
I love that you're like so vulnerable right now because you're talking about stuff that's real. I mean, and I think, as a white presenting male with blue eyes, by the way, I don't know if people can see it with the camera, but and you're so humbly saying, I sometimes also don't feel like I belong, yet I know I have privilege. I think that duality is got to be excruciating at times. And I think that a lot of people don't know that. People of color may project onto you that, oh, you've just got privilege, and not really understand there are times when that privilege does not serve you in all the ways that we think it might. So, really thank you for getting at just the surface of something that's very deep and touches so many of us. Because I don't really see a way of going forward on the planet without each other. Right? So we got to find a way. You're talking about intersectionality. We've got to find a way to come together on this stuff.
Yep. And that, I felt like joining Desk, is one way that I can contribute, because if I'm a white guy talking about whiteness and privilege, that is an opportunity that there are a lot of white people who struggle with the concept of white privilege, especially in Hawaii, because of that interpersonal sense of haole not being very cool here sometimes. And I think a lot of white people, if they hear someone who's not white talking about white privilege, it's easier for them to just write that off as like, oh, you're just, the history's in the past, I'm not racist, I don't see color, the colorblind types of microaggressions that are so common. And so I feel like this is one thing that I can speak to from my own experience that could help somehow.
Wow, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you really for that. So where do you want to go? Where do you see, let's just kind of close up with what's our future? Where do you, what do you see happening? What, should we be looking at?
Well, I do think that these dialogues need to be continued. They need to be encouraged. Personal experiences need to be included in these dialogues so that there is vulnerability. Because when we push, when we push an issue, we push and people are defensive, there's going to be closed ears. Very, very seldomly are people going to be open to that. And so what I loved about the class that I took from Dr. Karen Sugimoto was that there was this vulnerability of exploration that everybody was in their own way, and that everybody has aspects of privilege in different contexts, in different moments, and there's always a way that we can, be thinking about ourselves as multifaceted, privileged, and in many cases oppressed. They're not all the same, right? And so, like, being having male privilege is, or being oppressed sort of as as a woman, it's not necessarily the same as being oppressed as transgender or as disabled. Or there's all these different nuances. I study ageism a lot.
I noticed.
I work a lot with older adults. That's
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
my niche.
Yeah.
And ageism is a fascinating and just is throughout our community and our society. The amount of anti-aging
Yes. Oh,
things you find in one aisle at Costco,
yeah.
you know.
And then on the other flip side, the dismissal of the children's voice.
Children's
right?
voice, yep,
They're not
yep.
old enough. They don't have enough age.
Right,
And then,
right, right.
you know, we could be here all day.
Yeah.
In
right.
fact,
I
you
feel like
know,
we're just getting started.
we're
but
just
yeah.
getting started. And I knew that it would feel like that. I mean, I you know, did some background research into, I'm like, this is going to be a hard thing to contain with Dr. Morgan because he's so vast and deep, folks. And so if anybody wants to know more, I guess what would be the best way for them to, you know, contact you or know about you?
Yeah, I can't imagine who that would be, but and what they would want to know. But my email, lucas.morgan@gmail.com. I mean, email me, and happy to talk story and share stuff.
Right, right. Very accomplished. You're also in private practice, aren't you?
Private practice. Yep.
You must be quite busy these days.
Busy.
Yeah,
Oh my
yeah,
gosh, it's so hard saying no to folks. I gotta take care of myself too.
You
Sometimes
do,
'cause
I
I'm,
know.
like fried.
Yeah, your father, young
Yep.
child. That's
Son
right.
Jack is 3.5.
Yeah, yeah.
Wonderful wife and family, and I'm probably the luckiest person in the world.
Yeah, we
so-
are fortunate.
Yeah,
Thank you
yeah.
for expressing that gratitude. And I'm so glad that, again, that you're allowed yourself to be vulnerable. I would never want anybody who is telling their truth to feel minimized or dismissed in my presence. So I'm really grateful to hear you say that. Thank you for coming on. And so, viewer, please know that you can find us again on our emails. We'll put them in the link. And Dr. Morgan has written extensively on many, many topics. And so you can look up any of those articles as well. And again, thank you. If you're interested, look us up on Hawaii Psychological Association's Instagram, Facebook, and website. Aloha, folks.
Aloha.
Thank you so much, Lucas.
Thank you, Allana.
Okay.